Are the judges ready?
Yes.
Timer.
Yes.
A house divided against itself cannot stand, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all another. Abraham Lincoln. While many will equate this quote with Lincoln speaking on the divide of the Union between slave and free states, there was a much bigger problem going on. The North was essentially telling the federal government that the South owning slaves was morally wrong. This is not the way our nation was meant to run. This is why the nation was split. This was the house divided. Good morning. My name is Josie Rivas, and I stand for the resolution that slavery was not a justified reason for the Civil War. The Civil War, often when asked why it was fought, people's main responses will be slavery. But that in fact was not the case. This war was tirelessly fought in order for the states' rights to self-govern. Observation 1, definitions. I accept the affirmative team's definitions and would like to add the following. Tariffs, a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports. Source, dictionary.com. Observation 2, value. The affirmative's value was the quality of life for slaves. For this debate, our value is that each individual state to self-govern should be valued over federal overreach. Many people will say that the Civil War was fought purely over slaves, but even more so, the Southern states seceded to protect the rights they are given by the Constitution. Observation 3, criterion. For this debate, our criterion we will use to measure the value is the power given to the states by the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment states the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. This means that the Southern states owning slaves was in fact constitutional. Observation 4, contentions. Contention 1. The 10th Amendment protected the rights of the states. The states were allowed to have their own laws and govern differently than other states. The South owning the slaves was constitutional up until the 13th Amendment was added years later. Because this act was without a doubt constitutional, this war could not have been about slavery. Slavery was just one of the differences between the North and the South. Another difference was that the North's rights were not being infringed upon as the Southerners. If the North could dictate what they could and couldn't do purely by telling the federal government, what other constitutional rights could the South lose? Source, the 10th Amendment. Quote, Congress may take religion into their own hands. They may take into their own hands the education of their children. They may undertake the regulations of all roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. James Madison. Contention 2. The Civil War had many underlying reasons, one of which being tariffs. During Lincoln's presidency, Salmon P. Chase was his Secretary of Treasury. Unlike Hamilton, Chase issued taxes to help with the debt that America had been dealing with. A majority of the taxes were being paid by the Southern states. When asking the question of why did the Confederacy rebel during Lincoln's presidency, it is not about his outlook on slavery, but the fact that they were required to repay approximately 80% of the taxes. In addition, there was also talk of more tariffs upcoming. Isn't this more of a reason for a war to ensue rather than the right that the Southerners constitutionally possessed? If Abraham Lincoln approved Chase's tax plan, which he did, he could not have possibly been fighting for the equality of slaves because he didn't even equally tax his own Americans. Quote, I apologize for the iniquities in the practical applications of the tax, but if we should wait before collecting a tax to adjust the taxes upon each man in exact proportion with every other, we shall never collect any tax at all. Abraham Lincoln. Contention 3. The rights of the Southerners were being infringed upon. No issue should come between a country, so much so that most of the Southern states seceded from the Union. This war was fought to rejoin the South. However, how could the South possibly rejoin if their 10th Amendment right was being encroached upon? They couldn't possibly. What other rights would the federal government and the North violate? They were making a statement just like they did before in 1773 when the colonists dumped the tea into the Boston Harbor. Quote, liberty must at all hazards be supported. We have a right to it, derived from our Maker. But if we had not, our fathers have earned and bought it for us, at the expense of their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood. John Adams. Responses. The affirmative's contention 1 was that America could live out what they claimed. However, how would this war change anything? The affirmative team stated that this Civil War allowed our nation to truly become a nation of what our leaders hoped it would one day become. Did our forefathers want a divide between our country over slavery? In fact, most of the past presidents owned slaves themselves. They didn't want a war over a right that the South constitutionally possessed. If the forefathers truly wanted to end slavery, they would have written slavery abolished into the Constitution many years earlier. Affirmative's contention 2 was that it would lead to peace between the North and the South. This battle was in no way peaceful. The Civil War is known as the bloodiest war in American history for the loss of American lives, even more than both world wars. This was because they were fighting against their own people, father against son, brother against brother. Even after there was a victory, it would in no way be the same. The number of deaths, the ruthless generals who threw numerous men at each other, and the financial deficits this would put America through. This war, even after a winner was called, was personal and most definitely not peaceful. After the war, there were many years of Reconstruction, many years of reminders of the horrible turmoil the Union and Confederacy had for each other. It was not rainbows and butterflies, but 12 years of reconstructing what both sides had lost. If slavery was such a big problem in America, why would the president pin the North against the South? The affirmative team stated that compromises were put in place to solve the problems slavery was causing, but those were also enacted many years before, and if those were working, why would this war be about slavery? Affirmative's contention 3 was that it would cause freedom in the future. This war would actually cause more division than good. Yes, slaves were released after it was added into the Constitution. However, there was still a bad connotation that followed. Segregation throughout schools, racial slurs, and discrimination. There are many court cases fought over the thought of being equal. Brown versus Board of Education, Plessy versus Ferguson, Milliken versus Bradley. All of these cases are many years after the Civil War. These cases did more for solving freedom of black lives than the Civil War ever did. If this war was in fact fought for slaves so that it would cause freedom in the future, is it okay they should have freedom but not equality? Observation 5, conclusion. The right to own slaves at this time was constitutional. It was constitutional to have states' rights to individually govern themselves. This war was not fought for the equality of life for the slaves, but for states' rights. How could we be fighting for the quality of slaves' lives when we were throwing away soldiers' lives to intimidate the other side with numbers? We can't possibly do this. This battle shows the determination, persistence, the skill the Confederacy possessed to fight. The Civil War demonstrates the distance Americans are willing to go in order to sustain the rights the Constitution gave us, that our founding fathers gave us. Thank you for your time. Now stand ready for cross-examination.